Now, our fourth question, it comes from Colin Vincent of Bury St Edmunds, who's a civil servant. Mr Vincent, can we have your question, please?
What does the panel think of the news?
I'm sorry, I don't think we're hearing you. Can you just speak up again?
What does the panel think of the news that the CEGB is to develop a third nuclear power station at Sizewell, yet they've conceded that the nuclear power programme is uneconomic? What possible justification can there be for this decision?
Owen Granfield, Sizewell C, what do you think?
I think it's a disaster. There is no need whatsoever for this country to have a nuclear power programme. Clearly we need a nuclear industry because of the medical requirements and the medical advances that come from nuclear involvement.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
nuclear industry?
Let's just take radiotherapy, for example. It is a nuclear technique, and to avoid that and to ignore that is a nonsense. So we need to have a nuclear industry for peaceful and
but you don't
scientific
need to have Sizewell C for that.
reasons. We don't need to have Sizewell C. We are an island of coal surrounded by fish. There are 400 years' worth of coal under the ground. It just so happens the government don't want miners to dig it out. Now then, we have wind blowing over the country and waves washing against our shore. Indeed, they're washing away the shores of East Anglia daily. And I don't see why we shouldn't conserve resources, utilise those resources. And frankly, we're the dirtiest nation in the world. We are polluting the Irish Sea and everything up to the Arctic with our nuclear waste. It's a disgrace and it should stop.
John Carlyle.
No, I believe it's an insurance that we've got to take. I think that we have got to have available to us all forms of energy, and we've got to look at the costings, and the questioner is quite right, of course, that these have got to be questioned. But I think if we rely, as we have done, of course, previously, on one finite resource, which was, of course, coal originally, it does put us in a very, very difficult position. It puts us, of course, in terms of the people digging the coal, in political terms, of course, in danger. It also, I think, puts us in danger of lagging behind the world and then behind our competitors in industrial terms of being able to produce the cheapest and the cleanest form of energy. And I think there's a lot more costings have got to go along. But I think for us to abandon it at this stage, not to have some additional form of insurance, would be very, very foolhardy for the generations well into the 20th century.
But do you want a Sizewell C?
I believe that we've got to, if a Sizewell C is found to be necessary as part of this insurance policy, the answer to that must be yes.
Chernobyl.
Thank you. Sir Reginald Harland.
There's no doubt at all at present that the cheapest and best thing to do is to start measures for saving energy rather than to produce more of it. There's an awful lot of energy wasted in industry. No matter what the department's been doing, the government has cut down on the measures to insulate houses and so on, and it is the money spent in that way would save quite enough to do without Sizewell C. And this is where our money should be put first, because there is a lot more thinking to be done. Now, I've worked on with a firm that was dealing with wave energy, wind energy, and so on, and frankly, none of those are properly economic, certainly at the moment. A lot more work would have to be done, and they're unlikely to be economic in the end. And in any case, the main objection to wind energy was an entirely environmental one. The sight of all these enormous things with the blades going round, the noise, the interference, the problems with gliders or anything else round the place. Each form of energy has its own disadvantages. The point about not digging the coal is you don't want to fill the atmosphere with a lot more carbon dioxide, because that has its own threat. So that we do not want to dig the coal out in that sense, whether we've got the 400 years worth or not. We do not want the carbon dioxide, we do not want the sulphur in the air.
But surely the government's reason for not using coal so much in power stations isn't an environmental one, is it?
I don't think it is, unfortunately.
No,
It wasted a lot of time on these things, but the same applies to the oil. You could use oil, but you still get carbon dioxide and sulphur.
Do you think we should build it or not?
No, I said straight off to start with. What you require is to save the energy to start with, put the measures into that while you do further research on what you can do. Nevertheless, if nuclear power was made safer, was better, it is the form which will not pollute the earth nearly as much as the other methods.
Thanks very much.
To.
Colin Vincent, let's go back to you.
Well, I think we know that the nuclear power programme was actually started to produce nuclear materials for the nuclear weapons programme. And I think today it is a technology we don't need, it's uneconomic, and we can't handle safely. And John Carlyle talks about an insurance policy. It's certainly not an insurance policy I'd want to have.
But it's an insurance policy on the basis that surely we, to the future generations who come after us, that when these finite resources run out, as they will, then if we have left those generations without form of energy, and if I may say so to Sir Reginald, without form of an economic energy, the gripe that our industries have in this country is that the cost of their energy is higher than the cost of energy of their competitors in Europe and elsewhere. And that's why we've got to do a lot more work to make sure that the nuclear energy, and I believe in the long run it'll prove the cheapest of the lot.
Owen Granfield, brief word, please.
No one's yet mentioned Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, the fact that no commercial nuclear reactor has been built in America for the last 10 years. And you talk about insurance for future generations. The best insurance we can have for future generations is that we don't induce mutations by throwing more and more radioactive material into the atmosphere. I'm a biologist.
Let's go to the gentleman at the back on the right who patiently put his hand up and has waited some time. We're just coming to you. What's your point, please?
Well, I listened with interest to Mr. Carlyle agreeing and more or less sanctioning Sizewell C. It always mystified me that technology today, the gentleman talked about waves, windmills. In Norwich itself, I remember at least 30 years ago, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Summers introducing a heat pump.
Are you saying this is the sort of energy we should be going for?
Well, this was a long while back, but I'm going off the subject. What I was initially to say...
You are a little.
Yeah, what I was initially was saying is the fact that they're talking about the technology of producing nuclear waste, and the greatest problem is, after they produced it, is getting rid of it. They're just making a dumping ground of Norfolk, Suffolk and Essex. And lastly, will this bring the price of houses down in Sizewell?
Right. With those questions, we'll leave it there and try and move on to our last question.